Tonight you have seen the third in our quarantine quartet, an amazing film called The New Normal, which looks deeply inside the trauma that was experienced by the students at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School after the shooting in Parkland, Florida. We're thrilled to have Codi Barbini, a fantastic filmmaker who won the Emerging Director Award at Doc Utah, and she will be interviewed by our fabulous Tom Needham, the host of The Sounds of Film. Take it away, Tom and Codi.
Thank you very much. Hi, Codi. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, Tom. It's nice to meet you too.
Well, Codi, before we get started and talk about your movie, maybe you can share with the viewers where you're located right now, and also how COVID-19 is affecting you both personally and professionally.
Yeah, so I live in New York City. I'm in California right now. I got here about almost 3 weeks ago. And New York obviously was hit pretty hard, so it was a very weird experience in New York. A lot of my friends are healthcare workers, so I was sort of hearing what was going on from the inside. I'm really lucky in that I'm healthy and my family is healthy and my friends are healthy, even the ones fighting on the front line. And so in that regard, I can't really complain. Obviously, everyone's entire life is on hold right now, including productions, everybody's regular work is on hold. So I'm the type of person that has a hard time relaxing and not doing anything, and not having like a routine. So creatively, it's been really hard. Obviously, I'm not working right now on anything. I am editing a few things, and I've rented a ceramic wheel that I've been throwing on. I've done ceramics for like 5 years. It's a really, really meditative, great way to sort of get in touch with your body and get away from the screens, because that's, my life is on screens. So I'm as everybody else's is. So, just practicing gratitude, trying to be creative where I can, and trying to be really present in the moment, because I think that's what's so important about right now. We can think about, and this is so much of what the film taught me over the last few years is like, you can plan forever, but everything can change in an instant, and there is no set path and there is no set future that you have. Even if you've worked and you've set it up the way that you want to, everything could be gone in an instant. So, being here every day and working at every day, I think, is what I've been trying to do.
You said that you left for California 3 weeks ago. Did you fly, by the way?
I did.
How was that?
So I actually took some video of it. I can send you. But I think I was really lucky because I had been reading articles about people's experience flying after I had flown. And people were reporting like completely full flights. And, when I was looking for my ticket, flights were full. And because there aren't very many flights flying out of places, there's less options, obviously. And so there are more people on flights than there were before, maybe. But airport completely empty. It felt like it actually felt like a movie. Nothing. I was talking to the TSA guy, and he said that they're only allowed to work 1 day a week, and there's maybe like 150 people flying a day, and that's at JFK.
Wow.
You know, that's a place with like 10,000 people flying a day or more, usually.
Were you scared or?
Um, Gosh, I mean, at that point in the whole thing, I just felt like I couldn't be scared. Like, yeah, I didn't actually want to fly now, but I had a mask on. I was really lucky because there were only about 20 people on my flight.
Okay.
It was Saturday night. And I mean, there were people in hazmat suits at the airport.
Wow.
So people were doing, they were taking the proper precautions, and there was enough room to social distance on the flight, although I'm not really sure if that does anything. But, I had spent so much time being so fearful being in New York. It's like friends and family texting me all the time, like, what are you doing? You need to get out of New York. You need to get out of New York, And then you're reading the news, and you feel like, everything is heightened, and all the information is hard to decipher, so.
Well, it's interesting, with all this stuff that's going on right now. I was wondering, as someone who, in making this movie that you did, spent a lot of time around schools. Now, because of COVID-19, all the schools are closed, and we're hearing so much about kids. I should point out I'm a teacher too. We're hearing about how the kids are now doing remote learning. You dealt with kids, some of them who chose to stay home because they didn't feel comfortable going back to schools because of fear and anxiety and stress. What are your thoughts about the current situation? I don't know if you have any about the fact that America is not going to school right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't thought that much about it, but how old are the kids that you teach?
I teach in a high school, so a mixture, but mostly 8th graders and 10th graders mix.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure that it's so different. I'm sure that so many schools are handling it so differently. But even less than the kids, it's like on so many of the parents to be. Leah, my producer on the film, has been homeschooling her kids, her 2 kids, and that in itself is a full-time job. I think a lot of people have a newfound respect for teachers and how difficult your jobs really are after this, because Leah's kids are lucky because they're both in a loving home, and she has the time to help them and help them learn, help them understand things. But a lot of kids don't have that right now. They don't have safe homes, and they don't have safe spaces, or they can't pay their internet bill, or they don't have a computer.
Right.
So it's like, all of these sort of injustices and imbalances in our society are coming out because of that. And I think it's something that's really important that we should think about moving forward as we think about education, and as we think about, one of my friends works in a public school in Sunset Park in New York. And that's like a predominantly low income housing area. And, a lot of those kids, when they go to school, that's the only time they get to eat.
Right.
Because they don't have food at home, or they, don't have all of these things that we are all so used to having. So, I don't know if that answers your question. I haven't really thought about it that much. I would think about, I've thought about how I would handle it if I was still in high school. Or even, some of the kids at Stoneman Douglas who were juniors or sophomores at the time, and then this pandemic happens right after the shooting happens. And so then your trauma is almost building up more than maybe it would have before, So it's hard to say. I guess we'll learn a lot from this,
Yeah, it really is a subject matter that kind of leads into every other pre-existing issue. It's funny with coronavirus on the news now 24 hours a day. I think that maybe some people are forgetting that very recently we had a major gun problem in schools. And your film captures that and reminds us of that. You know, what do you think now? You know, as you look back at this experience, why is it so important for us to remember that even as life goes on and there's new problems coming forward that people have to deal with?
Well, I mean, I want to say that while it is predominantly a gun problem, it's not solely a gun problem.
Right.
I
That's
think we
true.
have a lot of issues with, I mean, support in school. It's families not having enough support, have major communication issues between teenagers, a lot of anger, a lot of like, you know, in a way, what happens with, and obviously I'm not like an expert on school shooters, but what happens often with these people that want to inflict a lot of pain on others, they feel like they're not seen and they're not heard. And so this is an extreme form of communications that people can hear them and can feel what they felt, or, you know their name, you know? So now that we're all going through this thing now where we all are sort of invisible, you know, and not seen and not heard, I just wonder how that is going to affect going back and reopening of society. You know, it's like people already are really angry that society has been closed. You know,
Right.
we see riots all over the place, people with guns. Gun sales have gone up,
Yeah.
you know, because people are afraid and people don't want to feel helpless and all of this for whatever reason, you know. But
It's so complicated, you
it's
know,
so complicated.
and as you pointed out, I mean, people are so divided. I was wondering, in your experience showing this film all over the country, um, have you been showing it basically to people who are, you know, basically already? Are you preaching to the choir? You know, are there people coming to see your movie that already feel strongly that there's a problem that needs to be fixed? Or are there people out there in the audience maybe who support gun rights, who are watching the film and maybe your film is having an impact on them? What has been the reaction? Who's watching your film? What are people's reactions to it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The first place we screened the film was in Utah. And, you know, the majority of people in Utah have guns and believe in a right to bear arms and all of these things. And we had a few instances at the festival where people didn't want to come and see it because it was about a school shooting. But, you know, and talking to people about what it's actually about and that it's not just about guns, and they can see firsthand how this sort of thing affects people, then maybe we can start to have a larger conversation on how to address all of these other issues that are the cause of it. You know, it's taking away guns. Listen, I don't own a gun. I don't want to own a gun. I don't think that people should own AR-15s. I don't think that people should own military grade rifles or weapons or whatever they are, you know. Those types of guns are designed to kill as many people in the least amount of time. So I don't know why any of us would need guns like that. But, you know, I've talked to a number of people that feel like they should have weapons like that to protect themselves from the government, from other people, from, you know, you name it. And I think that's fine. But, you know, again, I think a lot of people, you know, it's hard to say. We haven't screened the film that much. So there have been a few times where people didn't necessarily agree with banning assault rifles or banning guns altogether that did come and see the movie. And their reactions are, you know, that of maybe understanding slightly, you know. I don't know, it's hard to say, but I really do think that it's not I mean, it is about guns, but it's not totally about guns. I don't want to say that getting rid of guns is the solution, because I don't believe that it is.
Yeah. One of the things that I really liked about your movie is that it shows the effects on everyone after a shooting. And as I mentioned previously, I'm a teacher. And I mean, schools all over the country, even in places where there haven't been shootings, as a result of some of these well-known events, we're all having to make changes. And it's kind of depressing. Like those scenes that you show in your movie where the kids have to now all wear IDs. They have to wear these backpacks where all their possessions can be seen, where there's a constant police presence in their schools. I think they say at some point, one of the kids, that it feels like they're in jail. And you can understand them feeling like that. What was your takeaway after seeing all these changes that you witnessed?
Well, I think, again, a lot of these changes were really problematic, especially for some of the kids like Brandon, where, having an increased police presence isn't necessarily great for all students. It's
Right.
great for maybe white students, but it's not necessarily great for students of color who, are often misseen by police in so many different ways. So it doesn't necessarily make them feel more safe. That's not to say that police at the school did anything to any of those students, but it's just it's just the reality that we live in the United States. ID cards and clear backpacks. I don't think, the challenging thing, right, is that you can disagree with these changes that the school is making, but none of these people have done this before, have been through this before. The principals haven't, the administration hasn't, the teachers haven't. So everybody's just trying to do their best to make the changes as quickly as possible. So you can sympathize with that, it's like, especially you being a teacher, it's like after this happened, teachers are asked to go back to work 2 weeks later, surrounded by kids with extreme trauma, and asked to teach again and pick up right where you left off. And then you also have trauma because your colleagues have been killed and their desks empty in the classroom. So it's like, what's interesting about this shooting is that other school shootings that happened before this, the schools were closed down.
Yeah.
And students and teachers were not asked to go back to the school where all of this had happened. So often, like, buildings were demolished and rebuilt, and that was a way that people felt like they could heal after that, not have to go back. But what happens when you go back? So that was probably really challenging. But what do you do as a school? Like, do you reopen? Do you cancel the school year? Do you keep everybody at home, and do what we're doing now? Like, what's the answer? Nobody knows. So, a lot of these kids are guinea pigs, in a lot of ways. We're just trying to figure out what the best way to do it is. And obviously, this type of event affects everyone really differently. So going back to school for some kids and teachers could be really healing and beneficial. In other cases, it could be really, really traumatic and, re-traumatizing. So, I mean, what is the answer? Is it metal detectors? Is it more armed guards? Is it, they had officers with guns, one officer with a gun at the school. But again, you're going up against a kid with an AR-15, and you can't win against that. There's no protecting.
It's sort of an impossible situation if somebody really wanted to do something, but you do capture how, I think, sincerely the people tried to do the best that they could under difficult circumstances.
Right.
As a filmmaker, you got involved pretty early after this all happened. What made you decide to do this, and how did you meet these kids and get them to trust you to cover their lives for the next year?
Actually, before I answer that, I'm really curious on what would make you feel safe in school.
You know, I don't know that I'm the average person. I think I'm one of those people, like, and I think someone in your film said something similar, that statistically speaking, it's very rare, even with all the ones that have taken place, like statistically, it's still very little bit of a chance that it's going to happen. And I just try to think about those statistics. But I've thought about it a great deal, as everyone really has, and I don't know if people really do have any answers. I mean, there's definitely extreme steps that can be made to make it a fortress, and sometimes that's done. And if that's the goal, I mean, that can be done, but then you have to kind of balance it with people's lack of freedom and so forth. So I don't know what the right answer is. It's tough.
I know. There's
You know?
not just one answer,
Yeah.
So many things. I think schools need more support though, like mental health support and
Yeah.
communication support and stuff like that. But
So your story, how did you
right.
get involved with this? Why'd you want to do this?
Well, so actually my cousin is Gabby and
Oh,
in the film.
right.
And so, obviously on the 14th, I got calls and text messages from my family saying that there was an active shooter at Gabby's school, and that at her school was the school that the school shooting was just at. And, obviously, like, I called her, and she's 10 years younger than me, and she grew up in Florida, I grew up in California, so she was the cousin that I was like least closest with just because of our age and our distance. But I was in college by the time she was, in high school or in middle school. But she, a few days after the shooting, she asked me to come to Florida and film. I don't know. I definitely don't think that she thought that I would turn the cameras onto her. I think she was, all of the activism came out right after the fact, and, kids were getting on camera and voicing their opinions, and they were doing anything they could to get their story out and get these stories out so that these kids had a voice. And I think that some part of her wanted to help in some way and be part of that. I don't think that she wanted to be a spokesperson for something like this, but she wanted to help tell this story. And so she asked me to come, and I called my friend Kenny, who's a DP and my collaborator on this film. And he was already in Florida working on a commercial project. And he said to me, "Can you get here tomorrow?" And I did. I took the next flight out and I went to Florida. He met me at my aunt and uncle's house. And then we lived there for like about a year.
Wow. So you were all in. And how did you go about choosing all the other kids? Because, I mean, it was probably, a big decision in terms of, who you picked could decide what the message of the film would be and so on.
Right. So, I mean, it sort of happened organically. I knew that, when you're down there, when I was down there, there were cameras everywhere, every news crew, every station, every studio was down there trying to make a movie on this,
Yeah.
And all of the stories that were coming out in the media were about activism.
Right.
And I was, it's like, first day I got there, I went to a funeral, with my cousin, too. And then a memorial service. And then, it was on and on and on, and I wasn't seeing the activism like everybody else was talking about. Of course it was there, but I was experiencing these teenagers and their friends who were really just doing their best in trying to figure out how to handle something like this, and dealing with an immense amount of guilt, and dealing with, a sort of a lack of understanding of why this happened and how somebody could do something like this, and trying to understand why their friends were no longer here, and why it wasn't them, and everybody sort of replayed that day, what I was supposed to be in that building, or I wasn't supposed to be in that building, and what do I wear to a funeral? Or I went with my cousin and some of her friends, and this didn't make it into the film, but they went to a beach memorial service, and it was set up on social media for all the students. These kids are 16, 17, doing this for the first time. Gabby and her friends show up to the service with balloons, and no one is there. And apparently they had gotten the time wrong. So the service wasn't for a few hours later. And so they decided to release the balloons on the beach alone, and wrote messages on these balloons. And as they're getting ready to release them, one girl was like, "But I think it's bad for the environment to release the balloons." And they're like, "Yeah, we shouldn't do that actually." And they're like, "Maybe we should go over here and release them." And they're like, "Or maybe we should just pop them." And they're like, "No, that'll sound like gunshots." It's like the innocence in trying to understand and to figure something like this out. And then finally they release them, and all of the balloons get caught in the trees, and they don't even fly away. It was so, beautiful, because they're trying so hard to memorialize these people and show compassion and show, for themselves even. And
well, that's what's interesting about this movie, because even though it's about a very specific event and real people, I think there's a universal story here where you show how people deal with trauma, and grief, and the process of it. And I think that even people who have experienced other things might benefit from just the time that you spent with them over this period of time. It's very valuable.
Yeah, thank you. Did I answer your question?
You did. Yeah, I think so. It's funny though, you said that you made a reference to all the cameras being down there. And I think one of the things that I had wanted to ask you is, there was a lot of coverage of this story, and there's a bunch of movies also made on this event. And you kind of hinted at it right now, but it sounds like you wanted to do something a little bit different with this movie than what you were seeing everyone else do. Are you happy with what you set out to do and what you accomplished?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, when you look back on something, you want to do it differently, and you could do it differently in 100 different ways. And, there's so many things that maybe I would have done differently, or, in looking back, but I felt like that was the story that I needed to tell, and that was the story that was truthful in what I was seeing and experiencing. And even just the making of the movie, and like being with all of these kids and becoming a part of their lives in so many different ways, and being allowed to do that, was the best thing ever.
That's great. I like the scene with the tattoos. Why? I think it's kind of explanatory, but can you tell me why you wanted to include that? That was a great scene.
Oh, thank you. So, in true teenager fashion, almost every student at the school, except for my cousin, got a tattoo to remind them about the shooting. it's a metaphor in so many different ways, but it really was, just another way that these teenagers, these young people are trying to deal with something like this, but it's so much about memorializing pain on your body and making a tribute and all these different things that they really felt would make them feel better, and a lot of them did, so who am I to say that that wasn't the right thing for them to do?
Yeah. You really captured so well in this movie the idea that whenever there's one of these shootings, the media shows up, there's all these memorial services, a big deal is made, a lot of attention is given to kids, but then they all leave. And that's where your filmmaking comes in. And it can be devastating for people afterwards. Are there any takeaways in terms of like what you witnessed happen in terms of maybe, if this happens again in the future in other places, what people can do to better prepare for that sudden moment when everyone leaves and it's just back to normal, the new normal?
Right. That's a really good question. I mean, I don't know that you can prepare for the silence that happens after. It's, the thing there, Bill Clinton actually has a quote from one of his speeches after a shooting, and he says that, the thing that we have to remember with these types of events is that they're personal tragedies that because of the 24-hour news cycle, everyone knows and feels. But these are personal tragedies, and we forget that. And of course, the media is just doing their job. And I think in some ways it makes a lot of people feel better in the aftermath. Like people know that this happened to me. People see me. People can see my pain. They're remembering the victims. That's what's important. We matter. And then when everybody goes, they feel like they don't matter anymore. And then they're left with the silence. And that silence is when all of their real things that are going on start to come up, and they have to start to try and process them, which is hard. What's interesting about these shootings is that there are so many shootings that actually don't make the news.
Right.
And actually aren't covered in the way that this one was covered. And there are some communities that feel like, I think that there was one in, 1998. I have to double check the year, in Stockton, California. And there was no coverage really on it at all. It was at elementary school. But in some sort of ways, like this descending of the media can be a blessing and a curse, because from the moment that the media comes and people start writing about it, and obviously after this event happens, that place is forever associated with that event. It's not associated with anything else. So somebody says, oh, I'm from Parkland, Florida. And they're like, oh, right, that's where that shooting was. Or Columbine, that's where that shooting was, and so it becomes, what's so challenging, I think, and I don't know if the film really touches on this so much, but it's that all of these kids and all of these people in this community are given a new identity, an identity of survivor, an identity of, this horrible event that happened there. And it's something that they don't choose to be or to have, but they're given that by everyone else. And so that's part of this new identity that they have to reckon with in moving forward and going into the world in a new way. Daniel and Gabby are in college, and they didn't want to tell anybody that they were from Parkland because they didn't want to have to go into it. They didn't want to tell people that they lost a friend or they did this or that. They didn't want to have to explain themselves because they knew that that identity would be immediately given to them without them wanting to have it. Does that make sense?
It does. And how are the others doing? I'm sure everyone wants to know.
Good. Yeah. So Kelsey switched schools, which I think has been really, really great for her. Brandon's also in college. I mean, I have to I talked to Brandon the other day, but I need to talk to Daniel. Everybody's back in Florida, obviously, because schools are closed. But they're all healthy. Kelsey's doing really well, which made me really happy. I think changing schools was a really good thing for her to do. And Gabby's great, Nicole's great, Daniel's doing really well. He had gone to Alabama. He had gone to Bama and then transferred back to a college in Florida so that he could be closer to his family. And I think that was a really good thing for him to do too, because I think he really wanted to start over and not have the identity, you know?
Yeah.
But I think it was too soon. I think he needed to process, you know, with his family what had happened.
This is kind of a superficial question, but I was just watching the end of Tiger King, the reunion show, and all of the people who were featured in the documentary, or a lot of them that are still around, were asked, like, how does it feel to be in a documentary? You know, they're all having their brush with fame. And one of the things that comes out of documentaries sometimes is that people who were just living their lives, all of a sudden, like, they're in a movie. Did you notice any reaction to the people that you featured in the film in terms of how being in a movie impacted them, or didn't?
Well, you know, it's a really good question, because the film was actually supposed to be aired by a big TV network. And so in that case, we were actually worried about bullying the most.
Right. Yeah.
And so that was something that really worried me, obviously. But I mean, that's a whole longer story that we could get into. But you know, once I had made the film, I went back to Florida and I watched it with every family individually so that they could talk to me about it and make sure that they felt like they were represented in the way that they wanted to be represented, and that they liked it. You know, I mean, liked, you can't really like it, but you know what I mean?
Sure.
And I mean, that was the most emotional thing I had ever been through, doing that with all the families. And I think everybody was really grateful, you know, in the end. I don't think they've seen, you know, not enough people have seen the movie for them to maybe be recognizable or anything like that. Or I'm gonna segue, switch just slightly, which is the strange thing about the time that we're in right now is after the shooting happened, all of their followers on social media went up. So people from all over the world started following them online and sending them messages of, you know, hope and love and peace and all of that stuff. But so when you think about the film and you think about that, I think that's sort of a weird, important part of it. But back to your question, I don't know. I mean, I think that, you know, it's hard to say because the movie hasn't really been out yet. But I think that they are, you know, so much of what's so interesting about the film is that, you know, all of these kids didn't want to go to therapy and didn't want to talk to anybody about what they were going through, but they were talking to me and to Kenny.
Yeah.
And so I think, I mean, all of them have said to me in different times that talking to Kenny and I was really helpful for them, and they don't know how they would have made it through the school year without us. And so that's like the best thing, right? You couldn't ask for anything better than that. Not that I'm a therapist or, you know, can really help them work through their problems, but it's just, you know, the act of listening. It's like, that's so much of what the key to life is, you know, it's listening to people and hearing them and, you know, seeing them. So.
Well, It's funny. We've talked a lot about coronavirus, but in the last week or so, Governor Cuomo was talking about education, and he surprised people because he said, maybe it's time to just reimagine what education is. I don't know if you heard that.
Yeah.
And he actually asked the question, like, why do we have these buildings? Now, I know earlier you said that you recognize the fact that schools serve other purposes. In some cases, it's the place where kids get meals and services and things like that. But, you mentioned bullying too. There's good and there's bad that goes on. School is complicated. And now there's these tragedies that are happening over and over and over again. And it doesn't seem like there's any real easy solutions. Is there any part of you at all that wonders whether what Governor Cuomo is alluding to maybe is the path moving forward? I know it's a big question and you're a filmmaker, but you've been around for some time and you're studying it and you're talking to these kids. I'm curious what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, I think we need to reimagine a lot of
Right.
a lot of these different systems and structures that we've set up for ourselves. But I don't know that online learning is the answer because, I think so much of part of our communication issues, especially with this generation, my generation included, is that everything is on a screen, everything is through a screen. We block, we delete, we don't talk to each other, we don't see each other. I think we're social beings. We need to learn how to be together and learn how to talk to each other and learn how to, coexist. And so if that means dismantling all that we've made to then do that effectively, I think we should. I don't know what the answer is and how to do that.
Right.
I'm all for dismantling.
Yeah. Well, I know we have to wrap this up, but any other projects that you can let us know about that you're working on in the near future?
Yeah. So, there's one that's up right now. It's online and it is at A&D Museum. It's an immersive video installation. And I took 30 years of presidential addresses following mass shootings, and I play them together in 360. And it's one giant speech for presidents. Worth watching, especially after you watch this, I think. And then a few other things, but they're on my website. And
why don't you give everybody your website?
ifoundcodi.com.
Yeah, I wish we had gotten into it a little bit more, but you're an interesting person. You're an artist as well as a filmmaker. A filmmaker is an artist too, but you do all kinds of things. And I hope that we can get a chance to talk again in the future.
Yeah, me too. I'd love to hear more about your experience in the education system. Where are you?
Long Island.
Long Island.
Yeah.
Okay, well, when this is over and I'm back in New York, maybe we can meet up.
All right. Sounds good.
Cool.
But congratulations,
Thank you.
job well done, and I hope a lot of people get to see your movie.
Thank you so much. This is such a pleasure. I was nervous, but I had a good time.
Well, you did a great job. Okay, back to everyone at the Port Jeff Film Festival.
Hi.
I want to thank Tom and Codi for one of the most thoughtful and personal and interesting Q&As that I have ever heard. So thank you both. I just want to remind everyone to join in next Monday for Born Into the Gig, which is a lot of fun. And we'll see you at the movies.
Bye-bye.